Hi guys, Squirrel here and welcome to War Thunder Tips number 2. This episode covers landing. Now, landing is something that people don't practice often enough. The best thing to do is jump into test flight, like I've done here, and just give it a go. It's not so important in arcade mode, but in historic mode it's absolutely necessary. So here we are, we're at 1,000 feet, I'm going to land on that runway. I'm in a Spitfire, which of course is a fighter aircraft. I'm going to show you a fighter, an attacker and a bomber, and then wrap it up by showing you some in-game proper footage of me landing aircraft in some dire situations. Now the fighter of course is very lightweight, and in order to scrub speed off you can just wiggle the aircraft from left to right. I recommend you get down to about 300 on speed, then deploy your gear, press F for flaps to get the landing flaps, very important, that's going to allow you to come in much slower. The aim here is to get your speed somewhere between about 180 and 200. So if you're over 200, just bring the throttle down, and if you're getting down to about 150 is the absolute minimum you could land. Notice my crosshair, I was aiming at the front of the runway, I'm now aiming at the horizon, and just near the end I'm going to bring the nose up very slightly, and that brings it in for a nice gentle landing. Once you're on the ground, you need to press B for brakes, hold S down to keep the nose up, just keep touching the brakes with some intermittent gaps to stop yourself going head over heels and smashing your propeller. Let's have a look at the same thing where it goes slightly wrong. Here I'm coming in for my approach. My speed's a little bit too quick, but that's no problem, I can soon scrub it off in this aircraft. I'm going to aim my crosshair just at the front of the runway. I'm coming in, my flaps are down on landing position, gear is down, I'm looking very good. But I make a fatal mistake. Instead of pressing the brakes first, I press S key first to bring the nose up too quickly. So touchdown, at this point it should be braking, but I hold the S key down instead. That causes the aircraft to tilt up in the air, and when I come back down, the nose of the aircraft hits the ground before the wheels do. That smashes the propeller. Now it's not the end of the world, because I am about to get repaired anyway, but that's what happens if you don't press the brake first. It's very important to throttle down, press the brake, then press S key, and keep releasing the brake. Let's have a look at the same scenario, but only this time we're in a bow fighter. This is of course an attacker. You may have a torpedo on this, you may have some bombs on this, you've got to take that into account. I very much recommend that you release your bomb or your torpedo before you make your landing. Principle's the same, throttle right down. I'm going to dive down to about 200 altitude. That's the kind of approach I like to make. Now what you'll notice when you come to land something like the attacker versus the fighter, of course it can't turn as quickly, that's the main thing, but there's an awful lot more momentum. So not only does this thing bank more slowly, but it doesn't want to slow down as quickly, and you've got to take this into account when you're making your final approach. In addition to that, when I bring the landing gear down, it comes down a lot more slowly, so you can't be doing that last minute. In fact, you want to be doing that when you're a few hundred meters out, because that will let you put your landing flaps down as well. When you press F to bring your flaps down, it'll only go between raised and combat, but when your gear is down, it will go down to an additional selection, which is landing. Now you can see the wing there, you can see the flaps are way down. That is giving me an awful lot of lift, even at such a low speed. Again, the speed needs to be between 180 and 200 ideally. Throttle up if you need to. Look where my mouse cursor is. This time it's not at the front of the runway, it's quite high. I'm keeping that nose up. I'm letting the weight of the aircraft bring it down gently. As soon as we make touchdown, I start to brake. Then I press the S key to bring the nose up. Hold the brake, release the brake intermittently until the aircraft has lost all of its speed. If you're observant, you would notice the flight path was much more different to the fighter aircraft. It was a very gentle, long slope. You're going to see that again now as we take a look at the bomber. Now bear in mind, the things that I'm teaching you here aren't the only way to land the aircraft. You can of course land these aircraft much more aggressively, but it will depend on the situation you're in. If you can take your time over this, guarantee yourself a smooth landing, then do so. But if you're in dire straits and you need to make an emergency landing, then of course you're just going to have to adjust things. But the important thing is you practice landing and you get the principles right. The first thing is I just released all of my bombs. This Wellington carries 10 bombs, but notice my bomber reload in arcade mode, those bombs are going to be back in 60 seconds, which is pretty much before I make this landing, so I will probably have to make another bomb release before I make my landing. That gets rid of a lot of extra weight, but I've throttled down, I've put the combat flaps on, and the thing to notice is the wings of the bomber are massive, there's a lot of weight, and this thing will glide forever. You've got to take this into account because it's going to lose its speed a lot more slowly. The target is of course the same. We're aiming to get down to somewhere between 180 and 200 speed, and I want to get some altitude down. You can see this thing, even on 0 throttle, it just wants to keep lifting up. We're still 400 altitude, and I've got to start diving down, which of course is going to pick up more speed. I can't use my left and right tactic to scrub speed off. The bomber is just way too heavy for that. You can see it just doesn't want to move. So I'm going to aim a mouse cursor at the front of the runway. I can actually land this bomber at over 200 if I want to. That's not a problem, but this is quite a long runway. If your runway is fairly short, then you're going to have to land quite aggressively. You saw me release the bombs for the second time there. My gear's down now, my landing flaps are on, the mouse is aimed at the front of the runway. Got to get level up. It's looking good. We're down to 200 speed. I'm going to start bringing the nose up. The mouse is on the horizon and we're just gently losing altitude like we did in the Beaufighter. As soon as it touches down, start to make those brakes. Hit the S key. Once we've lost enough speed, we won't start to take off again. And otherwise, the principles are really the same as they were for the Attacker on the Beaufighter. Gentle glide path, touch down smoothly, jobs are good. Let's have a look at those principles being applied in an actual game. There's an IL-2 Sturmovich ahead of me. I'm about to have a head-to-head battle with him. I'm going to cause him some serious damage, but he's also unfortunately going to wreck my left engine. Now that left engine is going to need repairing. I can't use emergency power, it will just instantly destroy the engine. You can see it smoking. I realise I'm near the runway, the friendly runway, so I need to basically work out how to make a descent. Now, look, I am almost on top of this runway, so I'm going to have to somehow kill some speed and make a turn and get my altitude down from 340 and make a landing. So what I'll work out I can do is I can make a left banking turn and I should be able to glide in even if I lose my engine. So I'll throttle right down. Start to make my banking turn. Keep my eye on the runway just to make sure I'm coming in at the right angle. I can't unfortunately get down to my ideal altitude. You can see all of this mountain range here is blocking, so I'm going to have to work with what I've got. Unfortunately, as I make this dive, I'm picking up way too much speed. I'm up to over 300 now, which is not what I want. And you notice my left engine has now gone black. It's just died. So if I hadn't have made this landing, this would have been game over for this plane. Gears down, landing flaps are on. I'm coming in at over 200, so I'm coming in a little bit quick, but I should be okay. As long as I can keep my landing gentle. I'm making 200 as I make the land. Hit the brakes as soon as I can. Keep the nose up. And there you go. That repair has saved my aircraft. Cost me nothing to do. I just happened to be near a runway when it happened, but again, using all the things that you've learned, I managed to make that landing safely. Now, this is my final example, and this is probably my favourite example of all. Again, I'm going to get into some combat, and in this one I'm going to lose my entire left wing. Now that creates a number of problems, as you can imagine. The first thing that happens is I'm unable to rectify the attitude of my aircraft. I can't get it horizontal very easily. It also severely limits my ability just to even bank the aircraft. You'll see at the end of this fight here, you'll see what happens. It's all looking good so far in the combat. Until I have a friendly encounter with the biplane. Now, he doesn't seem too bothered by that, but that's knackered my left wing. Now look at my left wing, is just drooping down. I'm in arcade mode, so this thing is still flyable, but I am so far from the runway, and I can't rectify my plane. How do I get this thing back to being horizontal so that I can land the aircraft? Now, Just because the ailerons don't work doesn't mean to say the rudder doesn't. Now if you press the Q and E key, you can see what I'm doing there. I'm rectifying the angle or the attitude of my aircraft using only my rudder. That gets me into a more or less horizontal position. The only thing I've got to do now is basically make a banking turn without being shot, make a banking turn, get my gear down and land on the runway. Sounds easy, except there's a raging battle going over my head, and you'll see why this is probably my favourite clip, because in the midst of utter devastation I land this aircraft. My gear's down, I'm using only my rudder now to steer. My speed's just about okay to clear this hill, but watch what happens as I come into land. I'm trying to avoid all of the fire, and there's friendlies trying to shoot the planes. One goes right through me, a burning enemy goes over the top of me, and just to top it all off, there's utter carnage on the runway. But I hit the brakes, I keep my nose up, and right next to a fireball, I make a landing. One of my favourite landings in this game. That's it for the landing tips video. Just to summarise, get your speed between 180 and 200, get your gear down at around 300, engage those landing flaps. As you make your approach, bring the nose gently up. As you touch down, hold the brakes, keep releasing them, press the S key to bring the nose right up, and that will slow you down safely without flipping the aircraft over. Take into account the weight of the aircraft. Bombers weigh a lot more than fighters. Release the bombs before you even make that landing, and remember, even if you lose your wing, you can always use your rudder. And the final tip I've got for you, what I just did there, when you've landed in arcade mode, leave the aircraft, jump back in your plane, and you're 1,000 feet in the air. That's it for this War Thunder tips video. Please give me a like if you learned something. And also leave a comment and let me know if there's anything in particular you would like me to cover in War Thunder. Until then, take care guys, see you soon.